going? Okay, today's daf is Masechta Baba Sanhedrin. I keep saying that. It's Sanhedrin 41. We're going to start from towards the bottom over here. And again, we're talking about warnings. And here we go. When we're talking about capital punishment and we're talking about how we investigate and question and challenge the witnesses. So they first one of the questions we ask them, we're starting from Memo Medbay, 6 lines from the bottom. The one of the questions we ask him is Makirim Atem Oisoi. Do you recognize the man? In other words, did you recognize the guy who's dead? You're saying witness that so and so Reuven killed someone, so you have to recognize who did he kill? Tanur Rabbanan. What do you mean? Makirim Atem Oisoi. Do you recognize the person that the victim? Goy Harak, did he kill a Goy? Or Yisrael Harak, or he killed a Jew? Because there's a difference. If the man on trial killed a Goy, then he doesn't get Misa. But if he killed a Jew, then he's Chayiv Misa. Now here's another important point. His Sreisimboy, did you give him a warning not to kill? And Kibul Olav Hasra, did he in Hitir Atzmai Lemisa? Very interesting, very important point. When you give a warning to somebody, and the guy has to say, "I accept the warning. I understand what you just said, that I'm not allowed to kill," and he said, "I don't care if they bring me in trial and kill me." So he has to Hitir Atzmai Lemisa. He has to say that the man who is on trial had to have said after you gave him the warning that he doesn't care what's going to happen to him. He's giving himself over that even if he's found guilty, they will kill him. Heinous b'soich kidei diber, and here's the most difficult part of the warning. Again, this makes it so impossible to carry out a capital punishment case in Jewish law. He has to kill b'soich kidei diber right within 4 seconds after you gave the warning. And if he did not, then he may have forgotten, or the warning expires. So let's say even on Hilchos Shabbos, you're warning somebody, don't cook on Shabbos, because if you do that, you're going to be chayiv misa. And there was a 10-second delay from the time that you said that till the time that he turned on the fire to cook. So then your warning expired, and therefore the guy's not chayiv misa. So you need to have the warning to occur b'soich kidei dibar. If you're saying testimony about somebody that served idols, you have to know as mi avad. What type of idol did he worship? Le pa'or avad. Did he worship the idol pa'or? Or le makulis avad. Did he worship the idol makulis? Different ways to serve of those idols. Some of them you defecate in front of them, and some of them you throw stones at them. Ubameh avad. Or what did he serve them? Even if that's not the normal way to serve these idols. But if you do the following 4, then you get misa anyway. Bizibuach, did he slaughter an animal for the sake of the idol? Bikitur, did he do kataris salmon? Did he do incense? Benisach, did he pour wine? Bishtachava, did he bow to it? So those are the interesting things about warning. In order to be a valid capital punishment case, you have to have proper warnings. Ama'ula, so Ula said, Minayin lahasra min atara. How do you know you have to warn the person that's about to do an avera? How do you know you have to warn him min haTorah? Where does it say in the Torah you have to warn him? Shnema, so the Gemara says, Ula says, V'ish ki yikach es echoisoi bas aviv bas imai v'ra es arvasa. The Chumash says that one is not allowed to, of course, have relations with your sister. That's asur. Now, but the Torah adds, you get if you have relations with your sister, you get punished min hashamayim, called kares, you die young, or you can get malchus. They can give you malchus, and that will alleviate the kares. So if a man, the pasuk says that if a man wants to do bia with his sister, v'ra es ervasa, and he saw her undressed. So the Gemara, what does that mean? V'ra es arvasa. Ate b'ri'iyah talya milsa. Does his Avera have anything to do with seeing his sister undressed. It has to do with having relations with her. Ella, what the pasuk is saying, it's like a euphemistic way of talking. The person has to see the reason behind it. And that means he had to have been warned in order to do the Avera. That's what it means. He understood what he was about to do, which is sleep with his sister. How did he understand that? Because somebody warned him. Now, what's the benefit of warning him? Mainly in the chorus, to chayiv kares, we don't need a warning because God knows if you know what you're doing or not, or if you're just a total making a mistake. But we go to Amud Aleph, Mem Aleph, Teneu le'inyan Malkus, that regarding Malkus, to give Malkus to somebody, we apply that rule that you have to give a warning. So we have a source that when you do an Avera of Malkus, let's say a guy is about to eat nevela or trephus, so you have to warn him, and that's because that punishment would get Malkus. So we see that for Malkus you need a warning. The Beit Chizkiah Tani for Beit Chizkiah gives another source of how do you know you need a warning. Ki yazid ish el re'eu laharga ba'arma. The Torah tells us that if a man premeditates on his friend to kill, so he's a Reitzeach, right? But he premeditates, yazid. How do we know he did it on purpose? So it must be the Torah is talking about sheisr boy v'adayin who mazid. Somebody else warned him, the Edom warned him, and he still wants to kill somebody. So that's another source that you need to warn somebody. By the way, the misa for killing somebody, a Reitzeach, gets sayef. He gets punished by the sword. The Bei Rabbi Shmuel says, Hamoitzim oisim mekaishes eitzim. The Chumash talks about that they found somebody who was chopping wood on Shabbos. He was mechal Shabbos, and they gave him skila. So mekaishes eitzim means he's chopping wood at this moment when they found him. Not that he chopped wood. Shehisru boy v'adayin hu mekaishes. The Chumash implies that when they warned him, he continued chopping. So and he was mechal Shabbos. So we see another source for a skila. You need a warning. So we have so far Malkus, you need a warning. Sayef, you need a warning. For Skila, the Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana al Dvar Ashino al Iske Dibar, that it's discussing that if a Naro Hamurasa, which is a girl who's 12 years old, is engaged to somebody, and the Chumash says that if she was Mizana, so with someone, if that person was mezana with her, the person gets skila. So, and al devar, the person that slept with her must have been, there's some words exchanged between the Edom and the ones that slept with her. Al iski dibor, it must be that there was a exchange of words. What kind of words? The Edom warned him, don't sleep with her because you're going to get malchus. Utzricha, and I need all four cases that you get malchus, you need to warn somebody but prior to doing an avera in order for them to be put on trial. The ikos of Rachman of the Torah would have just said, "Achoisa, your sister, have a minute." I would have thought, "Have malchus ed." Only if you an avera that gets malchus, you have to have a warning. Chayve mises, but if you do such a severe avera, I might think because the fact that I would think, "Lo, you don't need a warning," because I would think. The fact that the Torah requires a warning is only to make it easier on a person. But if a Torah probably would make it easier on a person if you did a small Avera. But if you did a big Avera, I might think that you don't need a warning. Kasa Rachmana ki yazid. That the Torah tells you that if a Ritzeach would also need a warning. If the Torah just would have written v'chiyazid, havamida hanamil sayif to kill, only a type of Avera that gets the knife punishment, capital punishment, that needs, because that's a light punishment, that's a light avera, and therefore you need a warning. Avaskila de chamura, but if someone violated a skila avera, like he was mechal Shabbos, emaloi, I might think that the Torah went all out on him and said that person doesn't need a warning. Tzricha, that's why I need three cases. Why did the Chumash write two cases regarding skila? And for the Gemara, Rab Shimon, according to Rab Shimon, who says skila is not the the most chomer diga avera. The chomer diga, most severest avera, is the type of avera that you would get sreifa for. So one extra time that the Torah tells you need a warning by skila, even though it already said it, is to teach you that even sreifa would also need a warning. L'Rabbanan, according to Rabbanan, since skila is the most severest, so why did the Torah write twice by skila? You need warning. Gives you two examples. Even something that you could have figured out on your own, the Torah writes it anyway. Says the Gemara of Elichtiv Rachman ben Iskal of Leisa Bahanach Legimre Minei. Let the Torah just write Niskalin. Let the Torah write by skila. You need a warning. If you did such a big avera, the Torah says, no, I don't want him to be killed. You have to make sure there was a warning there. So I'll know that by lighter averas, you certainly need a warning. So the Torah could have written it that way. And says the Gemara, Hachinami, you're right. Things that you can figure out on your own with a kal v'chomer, the Torah writes it down anyway. So that sometimes the Torah is expresses the idea, even though you could have figured it out. So bottom line, you just saw over here that no matter what avera, whether it's malchus, whether it's misa, any type of misa, in order to give that punishment to the person on trial, he had to have been warned. Now, hitter atzme lemisa. Manolan, the guy who's being warned has to say, I don't care what happens to me. He has to acknowledge that he's receiving the warning and that he's going to do it anyway. How do you see that idea? Maybe you just have to say a warning and that's it. No, you have to have an exchange with the guy who's doing the avera. How do you know? Amar Ravavi, Temer Chizkiya, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Yuma Sameis. It means that until Pishnai made him Yuma Sameis, to kill the dead man. What do you mean he's a dead man? He must have received a warning that established himself as a dead man, as a person who doesn't care if Bezdin would kill him. So again, we see the idea, a very important idea, that not only do you have to give a warning, the Edom have to give a warning, the guy has to accept the warning and say, I don't care if about the warning, even if I end up going to court and Bezdin will kill me. Nu Gemara, Amar Rav Chanan, this is like a slight Gemara off the topic, but Rav Chanan said that the witnesses of a Nara Amarasa, again, a 12-year-old girl that's engaged, that did znus, so she herself did znus, so she's supposed to get skila, let's say. Shehuzmu, those Eidim were found false. Ein and Aragim, they don't get killed. Now, we know that once the Bezdin paskin that this girl should get killed, so then if the Eidim were found false, then they should get killed. And Rabbi Chanan said they will not get killed. Because they could say that our intention was not that this Nara Marasha should get killed. Our intention was to say testimony that she did znus is to aser her on her husband. So therefore, it's not clear why they came to Bezdin. They came to Bezdin to aser her on her husband. Or furthermore, they came to Bezdin to kill her. So if we're not certain, we don't kill the Eidim. Says the Gemara, but it's obviously Va'asrabe. Didn't they warn her that she's going to get Misa, and that's how we're killing this girl? And says the Gemara, the loy asruba. They didn't warn her. They didn't warn her. The loy asruba. If they didn't warn her, heicha miktala. Then how are we killing her? And says the Gemara, Be'isha chaveira. We're talking about Valib de Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. Here's a very important point, that not every person, every violator needs a warning. If we're dealing with a girl, let's say the 12-year-old girl went to school, went to yeshiva, and knows she's not, as once she's engaged, she's not supposed to do znus with anybody. So then there's no point of warning her. You don't need a warning. And this is the opinion of Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. It's not an absolute thing that you always need to warn somebody. If you see a big Talmud Chacham in Mechal Shabbos, so according to Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, you don't have to warn. The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says, Chave ein tzarach hasra. A big Talmud Chacham you don't have to warn them to put them on trial. The whole purpose of warning somebody to know the difference if he's doing it by mistake or on purpose. But we can know that if a guy is a chaver, he went to yeshiva and knows that you're not going to be Mechal Shabbos. So let's say he's Mechal Shabbos, you don't even have to warn him. The Kiva says the Gemara. So we're talking about a case that that we're going to kill the girl, and we're not going to kill the Eidim. So the Gemara asks, is that what Rav Chanan said? If we're not going to kill them, the Eidim, how we're going to kill her? If there is no possibility to do to the Eidim what you're going to do to her, so then we wouldn't kill her, because in order to be a valid witnesses, you have to have the ability to punish the witnesses if they're found false with the same punishment they want to prescribe to the person on trial. And therefore, if the girl is someone, if you're telling me that the Eidim could never be killed because they could always say that we came for a different purpose to asur her on her husband, then we won't kill the girl herself. So the Gemara says that's precisely what Rav Chanan meant to say. This is what he meant to say. Because the Eidim are not killed, because we came to asur her on her husband. So the girl herself will not be killed because it's Eidis that you can't prove false. Ella, says the Gemara, one last question. Let's say you have a learned woman who doesn't get any nara, let's say a learned nara marasa. She doesn't get any warning, according to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, how are you going to ever kill her? Because the Eidim could always say, we only came to asur her on her husband, and not anybody else, and not do anything else. And but it seems to say that there's a certain situation where we could kill her. Answers the Gemara, so she did znus, and she did it twice. So she did it twice. Let's say she did znus with Ruvain and did znus with Shimon. But already, the fact that she did znus with Ruvain, she's already asur on her husband. So when they came to say Eidis that she did znus with Shimon the second time, so it's obviously that they came not to asur her on her husband, but actually to get her killed. Says the Gemara, but they could say but we came to asur her on her second husband, and that's why we came the second time. Answers the Gemara, okay, they came twice. They told her the first time they came to Bez and say that this Nara did znus with Reuven. Then they came again to say testimony that she did znus with Reuven again. So therefore, the first time already they could say they came to Bezdin to put her to make her asur on her husband. But the second time they came to Bezdin, it's obviously with the intention to get her killed, and that would be the case with no warning. Inamish is in that she is nus with her relatives. Well, nus with her relatives, she was already asur on the relatives, and she's now so that's it. Why did Reb Chanan say a case of Nara Marasa, even if she was married? That would be the whole true. That every time a person says that on a married woman that they did znus, they can say, "Oh, our intention was to make her asur on her husband." And says, "Ain't that's true?" To say, even this girl who was never with her husband, we will trust the Eidim if they would say that our whole purpose was to asur her on her husband, but not to get her killed, and they won't get killed. Let's go to the Gemara, new Gemara, and here is the new Gemara, also about what's called a valid witness. Rav Chizda said, Echad oime b'sayif. One said harage. One said the perpetrator killed him with a knife. Echad oime ba'aririn haga. And one other says he killed him with an axe. That's not a proper edus, because they're arguing what the murder weapon was. One said he wore white clothing, one said he wore black clothing. That's fine. If they disagree with that, they're still considered a valid witness, because that's not relevant to the case. So let me ask you a question. The Brisa says, we need edus that agree with each other. This Brisa says clearly, if one witness says he wore white clothing and one witness says he wore black clothing, that's not a valid witness. And you told me that it is a valid witness because it's not relevant to the case. And says the Gemara, Rav Chizda will explain that Brisa, that when they're arguing what color clothing, It wasn't what clothing he was wearing, because the clothing was the murder weapon. Besuder shechankaboy. It's talking about the clothing that he choked the victim. Was it a black clothing? Was it white clothing? And therefore, they're arguing on the murder weapon. Now, Hainu, that's the same argument, Saif Aririm, if they're arguing if he killed with a knife or he killed with an axe. So therefore, that's why it's not proper edus. Tashma, coming here from this brisa. Echad oimer sandal of shecharim. The echad oimer sandal of levanim. Ein zen achain. One guy said he wore black shoes, and one guy says he wore white shoes. That's not a good proper edus. Wait a second. What's the difference? What kind of shoes he was wearing, and why would that invalidate the edus? Who cares what kind of shoes he was wearing? And says the Gemara, Hasanami Kagon Shaboy by Besander Levarage. He kicked somebody with the shoe. And that was the murder weapon. The shoe was the murder weapon. So if the Edom are arguing what color the murder weapon was, if it was a shoe, then they're invalid edis. Tashma, coming here. Umaisa Ubada ben Agzai beukse te'ena. That Azai wanted to know what was the branches of the fig tree. Presumably, a murder happened under a fig tree, and the question was, how big were the branches on the fig tree? And they were arguing about that idea, that concept, and Ben Zakkai puzzled them. So we see that even something ancillary to the case, if the Edom disagree about it, we will disqualify them. So Rabbi Mechama answered no. There it's talking about he uprooted a fig on Shabbos. He's getting killed because he did something with that tree. So it's important how big was the branch that he plucked a fig off the tree on Shabbos, or he cut the branch. How big was the branch? So that's why it was very relevant to the case. That's why Ben Zakkai puzzled the witnesses. Says the Gemara of Atanya, we learned in the Brisa, that the case was under a fig tree he got killed. And Ben Zakkai was asking how thick were the branches of that tree, and he puzzled the witnesses. Not that the fig tree, the murder happened under the fig tree. The fig tree branches was the weapon. He sharpened one of the branches of the tree and used that as a stabbing tool. But says the Gemara that's not the case. Tashma amalehem te'enuzu aktzeh dakin aktzeh gasin. Was the question that Rabbi Zakkai asked the witnesses, and they disagreed, was the thin branches or thick branches? Te'enim shchayros, where they had black figs on them, or te'enim levinus, white figs on them? Now, obviously, the figs were not the murder weapon. He was asking side questions just to catch the witnesses in a contradiction so he could disqualify them. So you see that you can disqualify witnesses even if you're asking a question not relevant to the case. El Amar Rav Yosef, Ben Zakkai is unique because Ben Zakkai, no matter what the question is, he will always, if the witnesses argue, he would disqualify the witnesses. Ben Zakkai had this chumrah that the witnesses have to be perfect, but the Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim say that if it's relevant to the murder weapon, then they have to be aligned. But if it's a side question that they're disagreeing, such as what type of clothing, what color of the clothing the murderer was wearing, so then even if the Edom disagree, they're still considered valid. So as the Gemara asks the side question, Man Ben Zakkai, what's the first name of this Ben Zakkai? Are you going to say that the story of Ben Zakkai disqualifying somebody who came to his court is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai mihava b'Sanhedrin? Was the court still in session, killing people in the lifetime of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? For Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Kol shnois Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai meiv esim shana. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived 120 years. Abam shana asib b'prakmatya. He did the first 40 years of his life. We could all learn from this. The first 40 years of his life, he busied himself with business. Mem shana lamed. Then for the next 40 years, he retired and was teaching himself Torah. Abam shana libin. Then for 40 years, the last 40 years, he was teaching. Vitanya. So the last 40 years are the main part of his life. Vitanya. Abam shana koidim churah rabayis golsa Sanhedrin yashilei bechanus. That the 40 years before the destruction of the temple, of the second temple, there was no more Sanhedrin. They left the Beis Hamikdash. And V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Dimi, Leimer Shalei Danu Dini Knossos. They were not poskening anymore court cases having to do with fines. So the Gemara said, Dini Knossos al Kadaitich. What do you mean? Court cases have nothing with fines? Who cares if they weren't in the Beis Hamikdash anymore? Court cases with fines can even be done b'zman hazeh. I mean, or during even Babel. It didn't need the Beis Hamikdash around. There was no more capital punishment cases 40 years before the Churban of the Bayis. Utnam, Mishachar Beis Hamikdash, Hiskar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. After the Churban Beis Hamikdash, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived. So the bottom line is that there was no more Sanhedrin judging capital punishment cases in the time of Ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So how could you say that this Ben Zakkai that we said in the Brisa and the Mishnah was the same Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, when in the lifetime of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai there was no more court cases? Ella ben Zakkai Dalma, it was some other person who went by the name Ben Zakkai. We don't know who he is. Achinami mistaber, and that makes sense. If it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, correlate Rabbi Ben Zakkai, why would Rabbeinu Kodesh call him Ben Zakkai? He had a first name. His name was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Why would the Mishnah say his name is Ben Zakkai, the son of Zakkai? So the Gemara says, Ella, Talmud Yosef possibly. Wait, so the Gemara asks the question. It seems that the Brisa says it was clearly Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who was involved in Sanhedrin. Ella, so the Gemara gives you a final answer. Talmud Yosef Rabbi Havi. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was in training, he was a student in front of the Sanhedrin. V'Alma Milson, he said something, and they liked what he said, so they invited him up to the court. We go to Amid Beis, the Kavua B'Shmei, and then they called the whole court after his name. So therefore, at that time, yes, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, when he was in the last 40 years of his life, certainly there was no Sanhedrin. But prior to that, there was a Sanhedrin. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a student, and they invited him once onto the court, and therefore it was possible that he was on a court even while he was not yet a teacher but a student. When he was a student, Ben Zakkai have a korelei. Rabbi. When he was a student, he was called Ben Zakkai. Ki have a limed. Have a korelei Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They would call him Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Ki korelei Ben Zakkai Hashem to be kara. When they called him Ben Zakkai, it was the earlier name that he had. But then, when he started teaching, they added the name. They actually added his first name. They called him Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and that's what we could learn about this Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and how to make sense of this entire case. Okay, we'll continue Be'ez Hashem tomorrow.
Thank you.
Let's continue the Gemara. The Mishnah said, Ma bein chakiras lebedikas. So the Mishnah discussed over here a case where even if let's say a non-relevant case, non-relevant question to the issue at hand, if one of them says, I don't know the answer, if one witness says, I don't know the answer to them, then it's still valid. Even if two of them says, I don't know, it's still a valid witness. So the Gemara says like this, what did the Mishnah mean that by a bedika, which is the not relevant question, even if two of them say that they don't have the answer, they don't know, it is still a valid witnesses. Pshita. Kiyama echad eini yadeya edus and kayamis. When one of them says, I don't know, you say it's valid, the witnesses are valid. Yomru beitrei, if two of them say, name edus and kayamis. If two of them say, we don't know, edus and kayamis, it's still a valid aid. So what did the Mishnah want to say with this? The Mishnah is supposed to be read that the two witnesses that both say, I don't know, it's going back on the beginning of the Mishnah. Let's see. This is what the Mishnah means to say. The Mishnah is not talking about there's two witnesses over here, but there are three witnesses over here. But Chakira is by the relevant questions. Two of them say, we know the answer. And one says, I don't know the answer. So let's say if you ask him, which place did the murder take place? And two of them say, so it took place, we know the answer to that. And one says, I don't know where the murder took place. Edus and Betela, the whole witnesses are invalid, even though you still have two that know the answer, but you need all three to know the answer to that question. Come on, our Mishnah goes, Karab Kiva, the Maka Shlai, that compares 3 to 2. So that's the novelty of the Mishnah, that the Mishnah is talking about where there are actually three witnesses. So then, in case, when it comes to the Bedikas, if two of them say, we know, and one says, I don't know, then the Edus would still be valid. That's what the understanding of the Mishnah. So Amar Rava said, Edus and Kiyamas Ketani. You're trying to say that the Edusin is going to be batal, but our Mishnah says the Edus and Kayamis, the Edus would be valid. But if you're saying that this last part of Shnayim Oimrum Echad Oime Eini Yadeya is going back on the ratio because Shnayim are saying we do know, then you have to change the Mishnah to say Edusan Kayamis, to Edusan Betela, and our Mishnah says Edusan Kayamis. El Amarava, this is what our Mishnah says. Hachikama. This is how you to read the Mishnah. Afila b'chakiris, even by chakiris, the relevant question. Shnai mar miyadano ve'echad meyeni dea. If two says we know and one says we don't know, Edusan Kayamis, it's a valid witness, because we'll just disregard one of them, and you still have two witnesses, so they're valid witnesses. Command the loik Rabbi Kiva. This would not go with the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. Anyway, let's go back to the Gemara. Kahana Rav Safra Tonis Sanhedrin Bei Rabba. Kahana and Rav Safra both learned Sanhedrin in the yeshiva of Rabba. Pagu Bahu Rabbi Bachama met them. Amalei Maim Risim Behim Sanhedrin Bei Rabba. What did they teach you in yeshiva when you're learning Masechta Sanhedrin in front of Rabbah? Amorlei, mi amrim be Sanhedrin Segreisa, my kashalach. What can we tell you if we weren't learning from such a great chacham? In other words, you're saying, it's like you're taunting us that we learned in Rabbah. Now we can answer your question. Not necessarily. Apparently you're coming with a question, and we'll see we can answer you whether we learned in Rabbah's yeshiva or not. I mean, if you have a question, let's try us out. Amalei, so Rabbi Bacham said, Mahadik Tani, that says in the Mishnah, Ma ben chakiras lebedikas, chakiras and bedikas, the Mishnah says, chakiras echad oime eni yedeh. If one says, I don't know, edus and betayla, the edus is bottle. Bedikas, by bedikas, oma echad eni yedeh. If one says, I don't know, and even if two of them say we don't know, Edus and Kiyamas, the Edus will still be valid, even if two of them. And like we learned before, that it's talking about that even if three came, and so we don't mevatel it, but it doesn't matter. Michte, idi deraisi, both by bedikas and by chakiris are both questions you ask. Is minatari is supposed to ask those questions. Ma'ishna chakiris and ma'ishna bedikas. What's the difference between chakiris and bedikas? Why by bedikas, if they don't know the answer, they're still valid witnesses, and by chakiris, if they don't know the answer, they're invalid witnesses. Malay, so they both responded hachi hashta. Chakiris, which are relevant questions, Emma echad eni yedei. If someone says, I don't know, edus and betela, the edus is batal. Let's say one of them says, I don't know where the murder took place, and one says, oh, it took place in Borough Park. But since you can't be mazim those edim, because you can't tell the edim imanu hayisem when that happened, because he doesn't know where the murder happened. It could happen anywhere, so he could be anywhere. The havila edus yatalach alazimai. So that's edus that you can't be mazim, and once you can't be mazim those edim, that's why edus and betela. Bedikas are side questions. Let's say what color shirt the person was wearing, right? If someone says I don't know, edus and kiyamis, the edus is still valid. Edus sheyakal alzimo, it still witnesses that you can be mazim, because the facts of the case they know exactly the facts of the case, what's relevant to the case. So therefore, that's the difference between Bedikas and Chakiris, and that's how you should understand the Mishnah. So Rav Safra and Rav Kahana both explained this to Rami Baba Chama. Amalahu, so Rami Baba Chama said, "Hihache amrusi tuvi amrisa." If this is the way you learned, that you probably learned very well and you understand your learning. Amrulay, so they kind back to him, and you complimented us on our learning, mitivusa demar amrini beituva, because you're a good, humble person. That's why you agreed to us that we're saying very good. Minizusa demar, but if you were a person that just wanted to taunt us and to ask questions, we wouldn't be able to then we wouldn't have been able to answer you. In other words, sometimes the acceptance of the answer of a person depends on the person asking the question. The person asking a question is there to taunt you, then no matter what you're going to answer him, he's not going to accept it. But if he's somebody who's interested to hear what you have to say, then he will accept your answer. If it's a valid answer, he would be more receptive to your answer. And they were complimenting him back that you were not a person that wanted to taunt us, but you're actually a person that um, wanted to hear our answer back. Okay, we'll stop right here. And so ends Daf Mem Aleph.